Hello there. This is Rish Outfield, and this is another Tales of eBay horror. I sell on eBay. I've done it for a long time, but it's not without its unpleasantness. Here's a tale of such unpleasantness. Now, I've mentioned before that feedback is an issue. You can leave feedback for a seller, but there was a time when you could leave feedback for a buyer as well. And eBay did away with that. But before that happened, I had a peculiar experience with it. I had a guy who, I'm trying to remember. Oh, what it was he bought something and then he didn't pay for it. And usually I give people the benefit of the doubt if they lie to me and say they didn't mean to buy it, or their kid did it, whatever, buyer's remorse even, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's fine. But when they don't say anything, but back in those days I would leave negative feedback, and rightly so. So I left negative feedback for a guy who didn't pay for something, and it was after like 3 or 4 weeks had gone by, because sometimes people don't realize, or they have problems finding the money. But this guy, he was just an asshole. And I got an email, an angry email of, how dare you leave negative feedback for me? And I was at work at the time, and I remember I typed back, you didn't pay. I issued a dispute, and then the dispute ended after, I think in those days it was 3 days, maybe it was 5 days. So you deserved the negative feedback. And a moment later I got another email, and I just assumed that it was him, with a giant F-U response. But no, it was that I had sold something that I had for sale. And a second later, I had sold a second thing. And I was just like, well, that's fortuitous. That's kind of, and then a third thing. I got 4 emails, and then a 5th email of my items were being bought. And of course, my spidey sense went off. I felt like I needed to check this out. So I clicked on one of those, and the buyer was the same guy who had just given negative feedback to. I didn't know what to do. He was systematically going through each one of my listings and buying them all, just as I said, an FU. So I went through, I was fairly new at the time. I didn't know what to do until I figured out how to block the buyer. That is a function that you still have if you choose to sell on eBay. You can always block somebody who has been uncool, dishonest, etc. And I blocked him. But not before he had bought 11 of my items. He had paid for none of them, but he had bought them all, so they were no longer available for someone else, and he wasn't going to pay for any of them. It was just his way of getting back at me, and it worked. It was an inconvenience, because in those days you had to pay for every listing that you put up, and if you put a buy it now on there, then you had to pay a little bit more, and what was done was done. I had to relist all of these items, and I had to pay a second time. And, truly, his revenge was greater than my retribution of giving him the negative feedback. He really, really got me. And years have passed. eBay no longer lets you leave negative feedback for a buyer. They've hamstrung us completely, really. The only alternative you have when you have been wronged or dealt with somebody who has been not cool is that they can never do it to you again. I guess a lesson that I learned the hard way with this guy. But still, I do miss the negative feedback a little bit, because you felt like, well, at least I've had a chance to put forth my side of the story, or my experience. If somebody said was very slow to ship, that's up there forever. But if somebody made demands, somebody requested some of their money back for blackmail purposes. Somebody pestered me with petty, snotty emails. Any number of things that can happen with a buyer. There's not anything really you can do, except for not sell on eBay. And you know, I'm not really advocating that you don't do that. It's up to you. I mean, it's a good way to make money. And when it works, when the process works, when it's firing on all cylinders, it's fun. You have a good feeling. The buyers on eBay should have a good feeling because it's like, oh, I beat the other bidders in obtaining this thing. But anyhow, there's another one. Not a terrible one, but I had mentioned feedback a few episodes ago, and I thought, oh yes, I was going to tell this story of, oh wow, look, somebody is buying all of my items. You know, I guess I could come up with a title for this episode of the good news and the bad news, but you know, I'll do a little better in the next episode. Well, I can't promise. Feel free to give me negative feedback if I fail, but I will try. I've been Rish Outfield, and this has been another tale of eBay horror. Good night. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to do the laugh anymore. Is that okay?
Bid with confidence.